According to James Fraser in The Golden Bough, originally published in 1890, the Homeric hymn to Demeter was composed in the 7th century before the Common Era. It is widely believed that this poem describes the narrative of the mysteries celebrated at ancient Eleusis. Already an established aspect of Greek culture when the poem was composed, these mysteries were celebrated for nearly 2,000 years, until the Roman Emperor Theodosius I closed the sanctuaries by decree in 392 AD. It was over 1,500 years later that the poet, prophet, magician, and adventurer Aleister Crowley declared his new Eleusis. The Rites of Eleusis were eventually published as a special supplement to the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 6, in the fall of 1911, and then largely forgotten. They were relegated to something of a footnote, even left out of Gems from the Equinox, edited by Israel Regardie in 1984. They seem destined to be read by the handful of magical dilettantes not frightened by Crowley's reputation, or perhaps succumbing to its allure, and so they remained for 70 years. That is, until February 1980 in San Francisco, California, where the Rites of Eleusis resurfaced once again.
The Rites of Eleusis were a great experience. It came from a coven of witches that was combined with an OTO body. We invoked everything we could find, but at one point we discovered that our lifestyle had perhaps incurred some karma that we wished to try to balance out by doing good. And the invocations, the goddess told us this is what we should do. We should invoke the Rites of Eleusis because this will be a good thing. And so we put all our funds and all our madness into it. And people made tremendous sacrifices to participate. People gave of themselves more than we could have ever asked. The experience was just phenomenal. For me, that was definitely one of the high points, one of the peaks of my life. I learned so much about myself and about everything else. We were all a part of it then. And we ended up doing things that more rational people wouldn't have anything to do with because it was a rush. And it made us feel godly. And that became a phrase that we all spoke of frequently, that we felt godly. We felt as if we were godlings. I'm Vandermeer. My acquaintance with the Rites of Eleusis started in 1979 and 1980. It was a project by a group of people called Nuit Urania, which was a coven and an OTO body headed by Chandria.
I had worked with Chandria for a number of years in a coven we'd been in a witchcraft group, local New Reformed Orthodox Order of the Golden Dawn.
We had done a lot of rituals, and it led us to the impression that we needed to do Rites of Eleusis to balance our karma, bestow good upon our brothers, and share a wonderful experience.
In my mind, it was she and Vandermeer together, though Chandria was always the person out there. She had a lot of drive and so on. Vandermeer was there as a very strong support person, though. I mean, he has a tremendous knowledge of Crowley's writing and the symbolism, say, in 777, just right, at that time it seemed to be, a lot of information and questions I would ask, actually, often Vandermeer could answer, whereas Chandria was really into the drama, the filming, the production, and she had the drive and the money, so that helps a lot.
All of this started in somebody's living room. Okay, the whole idea for the Rites of Eleusis started in Commander Marston's living room, and Crowley and Layla and Victor were just dinner guests, and it was part of the entertainment afterwards. And in more genteel times, this was not uncommon that after dinner, somebody would play the piano and sing
for your supper.
or recite poetry and stuff. And
Crowley took the parts, but he could recite the poetry, and
Layla could play the violin, and Victor would dance himself unconscious. And Crowley, and it started just as a duel. Okay, Layla played the violin, and everybody enjoyed it very much. And Crowley, not to be outdone, said, "Well, do you think if you think that listening to that violin song changed your consciousness, listen to this." And he goes off with a poem, and everybody, and they're probably sipping wine and probably taking substances that were legal in those days that maybe aren't legal now. And these people kept getting higher and higher and higher, and all of a sudden Victor says, "I'll top all of you," and Victor gets up and dances.
Crowley probably says Victor dance. I know Victor said I'll top all of it.
And whatever it was, Victor fell down unconscious at the end of it, so they must have been partying. But Crowley saw, just in the simple fact that an arbitrarily selected, even violin song, an ecstatic poem of some kind, and ecstatic dance of some kind, raised the level of consciousness of the participants. And that's when he got the idea of he said that's what the Rites of Eleusis originally were about.
And we pooled our funds, bought a house for the express purpose of doing the Rites of Eleusis, and a month later did indeed do the first Rites of Eleusis, and at the location we did the first three.
To the best of my knowledge, the first cycle was in the Bay Area. Now, I'm not sure about the East Coast because I'm pretty much totally West Coast kind of guy. Chandria started it out with the Lima Lodge people, and they would put them on a 1 month cycle. So you'd have a rite, 5 days later another rite, 5 days later another rite, timed in with the Rite of Luna on a Monday. And I don't know for how long they did that, but it was for a few years they did that, as far as I know.
I think the first one I can recall was like February 29th, 1980. We did the Rite of Saturn. And the first rounds was like, we did not advertise it. It just, nobody had ever heard of it. People have read Crowley's production, and it wasn't a big thing. So a lot of people hadn't heard about it. And by the time we did it the second time, there's throngs of people who wanted to attend.
I went to, I think it was the first one was Jupiter, and we spent the whole day just hanging out. She had this room dressed up completely in Jupiter colors and sigils that Vandermeer had made. It's very awesome. The food matched the ritual. Everyone was dressed in appropriate colors and combinations, and I didn't have anything, so Chandria had lots of stuff she dressed me up in, and that was fun.
But we did incorporate everything we could find in 777, the numbers of everything, the kameas, the colors, the incense, everything we could use to reinforce the invocations.
And the neighbors were like mowing their lawns for like 3 or 4 hours, just checking out the girls.
We had learned a lot as we went. We learned a lot about recording the events with film and sound and lights.
Again, like I say, it was script in hand. It was kind of I don't want to say primitive, but very basic. People were just trying to get their energy up for this kind of thing. And having the Mass in the middle was especially nice. I don't think that's very common.
But after that, I think it was a second round of rites, we said the third round, we put it in the magical lake, shooting ourselves in the foot. We put it in the lake and said, the third round of rites will be open, will be closed to the public, but open to all practicing magicians. Oh my God, did we catch hell for that? Everybody yelled at us. We were big elitists. We were big snobs. We had to. I took the Rite of Venus and chopped the heck out of it, put it back together. And we put at Grady's house, right next to Grady's house, there used to be on San Pablo Avenue. It was this, I think it was originally a beauty parlor, and we had taken it over and made it for our Gnostic masses and stuff. And so we said, this is, for everybody who wants to see it, this is the kind of ritual that we're doing in the Rites of Eleusis, and it was the Rite of Venus. We decked it, we were like wall-to-wall mattresses. There was a huge vagina made out of colored fabric over the top of the room, and this beautiful, the most beautiful princess we could find, laying, lounging on this chaste divan. And we had little girls with Easter baskets throwing rose petals all over everybody. We rocked them and socked them. When we were done, there were bodies laying all over the place, and every one of them had a grin on their face. So they knew then this was what the rites was about. This was like a tangible experience as a result of an invocation.
I told her that I thought these were so awesome, that they were so great, that actually she should do these publicly. And if she did do them publicly and invited the general pagan community to come to them, I'd join the OTO. So she did, and I did.
By shortening it to just an evening of magic, you can still convey the same experience. You know, just show up and be willing, we will share. And it seems like that's where it is at today.
She did, before she got into rewriting them, she directed a rite at, I think it was the Scottish Rite Hall, so some big venues, big halls, good lighting.
Including one very interesting venue, which was a large space at sort of a combination junkyard, mental health.
It was an insane asylum.
Sort of a junkyard insane asylum.
They were all people hungering for the ritual experience. And it would seem that they were hungering for an experience that they hadn't been able to find anyplace else, because they came great distances to join us, which amazed us, and it's still amazing that this quality, this intense of a ritual experience, is something that people are so serious about that they will go to great extremes to experience it.
But it must have been somewhere about the first year I was in the OTO. And there was a man there that a lot of people you get to know working them on rituals, and many of the same people would be working on the different rituals together. And we didn't have a huge cast of people, so we were looking at maybe a dozen people. But I hadn't really gotten to know any of them. And these were some people that I got to know very well by the end. And one of them was to be my future husband.
It was just a couple years before we started that she was actually getting things rolling, and people were attending from different parts of the United States. Not a large number of people, mostly from the Bay Area, but they had a very interesting kind of viewpoint on how to pull them off. And we got to show up one morning for a business meeting the day after a Rite of Venus had happened up in that area, and walked in on what one would probably say was just a giant hangover from a wonderful debacle. And at that point in time, I think the rest of us went, we have to do this. This is great.
I was invited up to play Brother Leo in the Rite of Saul, and so I got a chance to sort of see it in action. And the following year, Chandria asked if perhaps Haru Raha could mount one of the rites, and this was the Rite of Jupiter. Now, I believe this was 1983 or 82 forgive me.
Then the following year, we did the Rite of Venus here in my backyard.
So the rites started out in Northern California that year. The whole series started with the Rite of Saturn, and Grady played Saturn in Grady McMurtry played Saturn at that event, and then a caravan came from Northern California, including Grady and Chandria, and came down to Costa Mesa, and we're part of the Rite of Jupiter, and
At our house,
at our house.
which was actually just a couple blocks from here.
Yes.
But now it's apartments. It had a big yard and a house with a combination dining room, living room that we did it in.
I joined in Southern California at Raha Lodge, which was Lon Duquette's lodge. And they decided to put on the Rite of Jupiter. And that was in October, perhaps, of 1982. It was late 1982. That was the first rite I ever attended.
People wanted it. You didn't have to advertise. You didn't have to beg people. You had to fight them off with a stick. People were fighting over who got to play the various roles because there were so many people who wanted to do it. The atmosphere was always congenial.
By doing the work of that magical work of the set, the setting, the words, the music, the rhythm, the camaraderie, produces food for the gods, and that they come and join us, and it's that kind of, whatever effort it is, it works and it's beneficial. That's why we do magic.
They just have to be affected by the colors, the music, the incense, the dance, the sound, the motion, the words.
If everything is appropriate to that rite, then you would be affected.
So it doesn't matter if you understand what the hell that thing was about, or understand the interplay of the planets with their zodiac signs or their planetary rulerships or anything. You don't even have to just watch the thing like you listen to a symphony. Just watch it and just be bombarded with the pageantry of color and sound and motion, and you will have that particular trance. He even called it a trance. You'll come away, after Saturn, you'll come away with the trance of being somewhat bummed out.
Because each one's the fall of that planet, so
Right.
It's from the peak to its fall.
The descent of matter.
The descent of matter into you. How did I get this way? Well, because of all of it.
In fact, the memorable part about that was the Frater Superior at the time, Grady McMurtry, played Saturn in the rites and came down for the Rite of Jupiter and was our guest and actually did the opening banishing. So that was a very historic connection, as one of Crowley's students actually performing a banishing ritual in front of me as a very new mineral. So
First, I think it was talking with Lon. I was a student of Lon's, and I joined the OTO in 1981 and became immediately interested in what these plays were that were taking place, and he would talk about Eleusis, and I didn't know what Eleusis meant. So he told me a little bit about that, and I said, why aren't we doing this in Southern California? We could most certainly pull it off somehow. And so it was that year, 1981, I think it was, that we did our first Rite of Jupiter in Lon's, inside in his living room, on the carpet with bad polyester robes and everything. But I was attracted, I think, mostly just because I really enjoyed theater, and it was a fun way to get involved at a very simple and, easy way. It was fun.
My first rite that I attended was a Rite of Jupiter at Raha Lodge, and I guess it was Costa Mesa at that time, and I guess for me, Jupiter was kind of seminal, really. I mean, it was kind of a favorite with that body, not just because of all the drinking, but because of all the Bacchic frenzy. That was just so much fun, and it was it was funny. It was Lon and Connie's little apartment on 21st Avenue in Costa Mesa. Just a tiny little rectory room, and yet somehow it was the hills of Greece after a few rounds of champagne. And the story was told. I was there. The story was told to me later that people actually began singing the Eroica in German, although nobody spoke German. But I don't recall that.
First rite we did was Jupiter, as I said, in Lon's place. And there were probably, a total of 12 of us there. So, we had 3 people watching. Everybody else was in the rite. And very, very small crowd. But that was in the beginning. By the time we reached our peak, we did a Venus with 65 people in attendance. And, well, I'll get into stories later.
One specific situation that had happened that brings it to mind. This was when we first started doing the rites in sequence. We'd done Jupiter and then we did Mars. And right after the rite of Mars, and again, this was the early 80s, at the conclusion of the rite of Mars, there was all sorts of world disaster that had happened. There was the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut. The Russians had shot down the Korean airliner. Things were very, 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 very tense on a worldwide stage. And I can remember someone making the comment that we really need to do the Rite of Soul, why we still have a planet to do it on.
So I had to do Soul a number of times to feel comfortable with it. And one of the times that I didn't really feel comfortable, I was Soul, Grady was Bez. After I'm crucified, they take you down and they throw you in the coffin. Well, I didn't have a real coffin. I just made a box out of plywood, and the lid was sitting on top. And Grady's about 6'2", 190 pounds, always wears combat boots. When Bez does his dance on the lid of the coffin, it scared the shit out of me. That lid was bouncing up and down like crazy. I thought at any minute his combat boots were going to come crashing through my chest. If I hadn't died on the cross, I was sure I was going to die any second. I think that was the single most heart-throbbing, terrifying moment I can recall in the rites. I was afraid Grady was going to fucking kill me.
From the mid-1980s onward, the backyard productions of the Rites of Eleusis took on a life of their own. Productions became as varied as the bodies who staged them, breathing new life into these passion plays. Through this constant evolution, these initiatory rites reached more people than their original author could have hoped for. Clearly, there was a demand for the experience these dramas embodied.
We did do them in sequence. We would start with Saturn, work our way down to Luna, and in some instances, people have created their own rite of Earth. They tended to be staged apart. Different bodies would put on different rites. And it was very embryonic. We were figuring things out at the time. They hadn't been done before. We'd never seen them done before. How do you put on this production? How do you put on this performance? Why is this particular colored light used? How can we go about implementing that? How can we get the most bang for a buck, shall we say?
I certainly didn't have any acting experience, and pretty much nor did anyone else in the Southern California OTO. I mean, we were the rankest amateurs you could imagine, and we have the videos to prove it. We can back this up. But there's so what we lacked in excellence, we certainly made up for with enthusiasm.
Exactly.
My first rite was also in a backyard in Eagle Rock, California, with the Laravel's home, and they had a nice grassy area in the back set up, and it was a rite of Jupiter, so it was sort of Bacchanalian. Everybody was dressed in, we had great weaves in her hair and things, and it was a very fun experience.
I was fortunate to be to quite a few of those because I was kind of when I was checking things out before I became an official member. And, that, of course, was, some amazing people. We've got, Lonk Duquette and Constance and, Doug and Karen James and, Vera, of course, Chappelle and Lita Chappelle. And it's like all these people who are just, really movers and shakers within the order created these rites that I think in a lot of ways have been the springboard for a lot of magical energy and a lot of magical interaction and fraternity, because the Rites of Eleusis magically do that. It's like there's an energy, a magic that is emitted with this interactive creation, because it's interactive. It's not just a play that people watch. You become a part of the show. You become a part of the ritual. And it's a ritual theater that then kind of sparks this magic within you and inspires people to do stuff. And that is, I think, what becomes the heart of the Rites of Eleusis, and I think part of what Crowley was talking about with the ecstasy of the sacred, kind of blooming within you.
It's hard to tell how he really performed them, because Crowley's not really great sometimes for putting in sufficient blocking instructions. We always had to embellish and add. So just reading the actual scripts,
that's true.
It's kind of hard to say, well, how did they actually perform them? All we have is a few pictures and the scripts.
But in the photograph that we see, the one photograph I can think of is the Rite of Saturn with the Kamea on the box and
square.
And of course we always had violin music because that was the music that was available. But maybe the point I'm making is just that you work with what you have, and so for us looking at that, it seems flat. Looking at the photographs, we don't know what else they did. Of course, just like you said, talk about blocking.
Sparse.
Very sparse.
What was nice about the rites is they would tend to theme. They would use a theme. So with Venus, for example, it would be 1920s Paris. People would be in white tie and tails. Women would be in exquisite dresses. It would be extremely opulent with catered gourmet food and martinis and champagne. Extremely opulent. Plus some of the carnal activity that went with it, being the Rite of Venus, of course. Those were some of the more memorable ones. It was kind of, to use the parlance of 12-step programs today, it really made people to keep coming back. So, and we did.
They were big events and elaborate events, and I remember the first Rite of Venus that I attended, and it was at the James's house at 93 Lodge. I think it was maybe 93 Oasis then.
The first rite that we decided to do in our home was a Rite of Venus. And as I said, 65 people were in attendance. And in that group, we really were pretty green. We didn't know any better. I was really new to the OTO.
There was egg salad with caviar and, a sit-down dinner, and they did, rentals from Abbey Rents, and there were, little tables and chairs. And
I don't know what in the world I was thinking, but I decided I could make a Cornish game hen dinner for everyone. We had oysters in the half shell. The oysters, a bad night, and then I didn't know that when you celebrated the rite, you were actually celebrating the fall. And so it's a bad idea to have oysters in the half shell when Venus is going to take a fall. And so poor Doug was going to shuck 130 oysters or something himself, and he cracked open, I guess, a few. I don't remember.
I must have done 40.
And then he cracked the 41st, and he thought, these smell kind of funny. Only to realize that the entire batch was bad. So, being who we were at the time, still are, but maybe not quite that enthusiastic, he jammed on down to the fish store down in the harbor and scooped up a whole bunch more and brought them back and started shucking oysters. And we pulled it off. We pulled it off, but it was intense. And the rite itself was, as I recall, pretty much a comedy of errors. But everyone looked fabulous.
She got her kids to serve food, and I mean, it was.
So that was even the little tuxedo.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's.
Right, even Samantha and Samantha's boyfriend. I mean, she had her kids serving,
and so my little daughter's, who was 10, her little friend, we rented them French maids costumes, and they dressed like French maids, and the boys were 10. This is Lana Constance's boy, Jean-Paul, and our son, Abraham, wore little tuxedos, and they were little, and they passed a rose out to each of the ladies when they came. They were, as they walked in, they got a rose from these darling little children dressed, and the theme, as I recall, was putting on the Ritz.
The rites are an initiatory experience. It may not seem like they're an initiation, but they are.
Because they're not scary.
Unless
you have stage fright.
As you're preparing for it, and as the caprice of what the moment is that causes you to be cast as one character or another.
Oh, we were all typecast because at the beginning we got to choose our parts, so.
Whatever goes on in the time period from when you prepare to do it, and you prepare your part, and you work with everybody else, it is in your life a real, live, magical initiatory experience. And to go through the entire series,
year after year,
for
quite a few years, it's really makes you different. And you find out later in your life that quotations from it, you don't even remember what rite sometimes, will pop into your head at certain situations. Just wonderful that you don't know, why is this, that help you, or you learn something from them. So
I think these rites are timeless. But I do think there will be perhaps a different take on them, in that I'm only guessing that we're in for a real surprise on what a new generation does with them. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping they don't die. I'm hoping that, young people come along, and I say young people only because I have a daughter who's 40, so, I hope that young people come along and scoop them up and keep them going. And change them, modernize them the way that we did. We never ever said they didn't work the way that Crowley wrote them. But they didn't really work for our generation the way that they were originally performed. They were weird and flat. I love Crowley, but they were weird and flat.
And then after that, I saw a number of rites at the James's home, where they would perform in their spacious backyard, which is kind of set up like, almost like an amphitheater, I think. And it was, Luna. We also did Luna campouts. We had like a Mercury Luna weekend where we would have the rite of the rite of Mercury during the day, and then that night we'd have the rite of Luna, and then usually we would have a Gnostic Mass the next day.
I remember the first thing I went to, I said earlier, the first thing I went to was a Rite of Saturn. It was my first OTO event at Lon Duquette's house. And whoever the person was that was playing, I think it was Capricornus Emissarius, was just beating like crazy on a drum, tom-tom, all that. Was beating on the drum, throwing the drum up in the air, throwing the drum up in the air and catching it, throwing the drum up in the air and catching it, throwing it. It was just, the energy was building and building. And
what I ended up doing was tossing the drum up in the air. It got away from me.
The drum came down on, I believe it was Magister Templi's nose.
Smashed into my brother Jim Kabavic's nose, broke his nose.
Oh!
Massive concussion. I mean, he ended up with like holding his nose.
There was blood everywhere. And that was my first OTO event I ever went to, and I went, wow, these guys are hardcore.
Through the gushing blood, just finishing his lines, and we had a night of, taking him to the hospital. And
then after a while I realized it was an accident. But, at first, I was like, taken back by that. But it is a cautionary tale on how that energy builds, because it was really building in there, and it's supposed to. But there also has to be the balance of the containment and the focusing of the energy.
That's a very, very important lesson for anybody involved in any kind of ceremony.
And a big lesson as to why we have to have liability insurance.
Not recommended.
No.
No.
I worked briefly with a fellow who was a member of the OTO and went to a Gnostic Mass, and from there I was hooked. And the first rite I went to was the Rite of Saturn, and it had to have been the late 80s. very interesting, very fun. I slowly got hooked into minor roles, not being the stand-up in front of people type. I was given minor parts. I've done a little bit of everything in all of the rites. I mostly did behind the scenes, sound, setup, minor roles, but I've had a lot of fun.
The first rite that I was ever in was the Rite of Luna, and it must have been in like 1989. And Steve was one of the officers in the temple.
Which one? Was that the cupbearer?
I don't remember. I don't remember anymore. It's been so long ago. Yeah. But you were one of Luna's officers, and I was. I read the 963 and was a champagne server, and I was like up at the front serving the officers at the temple. And I told Steve, "Do you want to hear my lunar confession?" And he said, yeah. And I said, "I'm developing a major crush on you." And that's when we started dating.
Nice.
I believe the nicest one that I saw, I actually invited my mother to see it, was a Rite of Luna that was done at Doug and Karen's place, Doug and Karen James, in San Juan Capistrano.
It was a lot of fun to create an environment and then do the rite itself, and it sort of lent to the spirit of the whole rite, and it was very successful, we thought.
The garage itself, it was in the garage, and they had like straw and things on the fake wood. It was like a woodland pond area at night, and there were actually fireflies with batteries and frog croaking sounds and stumps to sit on. It was just, you could swear with the lights off that you were sitting by a pond with crickets and frogs.
It was a fairy grotto sort of set.
You felt like you were in Midsummer Night's Dream.
It was
you really
beautiful.
did.
And we painted the taw and the sephra on the floor, and we got bales of hay just to give it a woodsy kind of look, and strew hay all over the floor.
Tree cuttings, right?
And in tree cuttings, the rafters had tree cuttings, so it looked.
I drove for a whole day and collected gardener's cuttings to from the rafters in the garage.
Yeah.
They had a fog machine going.
Oh, that too.
Okay, so that the air was filled with mist, and the veil wasn't a cloth veil. The veil was a veil of like laser light.
It just surrounded Karen, and she stood there completely still for the entire ride.
She stood up the entire ride
beautifully.
Behind the laser light, and of course the light came through the fog, and so while the light was on, you couldn't see her except when the drifting fog would allow you to see that there's a veiled goddess behind there. And when Doug as Pan eventually unveils her, they just shut off the light, and there she was, and it was pretty amazing.
Luna's a difficult one because of the libation cycle, the repetitive libation cycle. Trying to maintain to get into the entire cycle of libations. So I would say probably Rites of Luna. We had a pianist who was unfortunately in the dark because Luna was outlined in a beautiful laser kind of thing. I don't know lasers, but it was spinning around and it was shiny. And so Luna was off in the dark playing Claire de Lune, I believe. And that one always sticks in my mind because I was with a little tiny pen light trying to go across the music, help her read the music, and trying to remember how to read it myself so I'd have the light in the right spot.
Very well done on many different levels. Mom wouldn't stop talking about it. She thought it was wonderful and thought I had a great bunch of friends. And she had a great time talking to everybody. if somebody did approach her, she would approach them.
I think another thing about that one and some of the others that was so successful was that we always encouraged attendees and people in the audience to also dress according to theme or color. You know, you either wear the color or you wear a costume for the theme. And we themed all of the rites. It was not just simply getting up in our robes and doing the reading and so forth, but we wore costumes and everything was set to theme. And so in that particular one, everyone came as a nymph or a satyr. And you've never seen costumes like this, I don't think, in your life. It was just amazing. And of course they chanted Eo Pan. And there were 55 people in a 2-car garage. And this laser comes going and the background and everything. And when they were doing Eo Pan, suddenly it became harmonic. And I don't think I've ever experienced a tingle in my body in terms of a magical presence like I did just being in that place with all of those beautiful voices and everyone in tune to the same invocation. There was not a glitch in the room. It was beautiful. And that's probably one of the most successful rites I think we ever did.
At first, it took a little bit for the community to catch on, and then as they continued, the LA group of like artistic and creative people, not even just Thelemites, but the community at large, started to show up. And we started getting larger and larger participation, and eventually we had to move it out of the Besant Lodge and into the Raven's Flight, which was a kind of occult bookstore, coffee house, hangout place for a while, where LVX did a number of rituals and things there as well.
I guess I started out, as I already described, sort of taking myself very seriously in terms of physical movement and invocation. I kind of moved out of that phase and into a much more mundane phase of really enjoying particularly some of the comedy. There's a lot of comedy in especially Soul. We loved the comedy in Soul, loved the interplay between Aries and Leo, and we did. So I liked to. We like to try to find themes that would bring some of that out. We did a Mexican Soul.
Hugo Aguiano was Saul, and it was a Mexican thing. He was a Mexican Jesus crucified on a cactus, a saguaro cactus. It was, and they were in sombreros, and they had guns, and they drank shots of tequila while they. But it was all, and they had poetry memorized. You have to do a little bit of it.
And they had a wonderful, wearing giant sombreros and dancing around and laughing and just hearing them trying to do Mexican accents and dancing with the hats was just a killer. We laughed more than anything else in that ride.
The cross was a cactus. Not a real cactus, just a kind of cactus, because we liked the guy we had up on it. Big sombreros, 6-shooters, tequila, really good tequila.
I was Scorpio Apophis, and when I came the first time and they throw me out, they took me and they threw me in the pool. So then I had a big costume change. So while I was doing my costume change to come back with my minions, Leo and they would be drinking shots and
really good tequila.
And they were, so they could barely get through the rest of the night.
And so, as always, somebody comes up with some clever idea, and they decided to, Steve and Lon decided to do before the beginning of years, and they had cap pistols, of course, the whole time, and big, sombreros, and they were,
banditos.
Banditos. They were
dressed
banditos.
as banditos.
And I don't recall. It was
the Mexican hat dance.
Oh.
They did before the beginning of years.
There came to the making of man, time with the gift of tears, brief with a glass of ran.
They shoot the
pleasure but pain for leaven, summer with flowers that fell, remembrance fallen from heaven, and madness risen from hell. Boom, 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 boom.
Well, there's the Mars story of the Mars that was done at Lon's house, and the person I was dating at the time did a fire dance, a dance with fire, and she had blood caps in her mouth too. It was a prelude to the opening of Mars. So she did this wild dance with fire and blood caps. The neighbors saw it, and they called the police. And the police showed up,
and Lon loves to tell this story, that it was Officer Redman who came to the call. Not Redman, R-E-D-M-A-N. Officer Redman was the one who came to the door inquiring about why we were sacrificing children in the backyard or some such, nonsense that the neighbor they saw the fire and the blood. And that was the other Mars story that
That's a very good one.
Many of the rites were kind of like old Star Trek episodes, minimalist sets, pieces of cloth hanging from the ceiling, garages with everything piled up in the corner and covered with bed sheets, people using bed sheets for costumes, their OTO robes. I did that once or twice. They're very informal. Nobody was too hysterical about everything being perfect. We all read from scripts. They were fun. They were very laid back, and I believe that I enjoyed those days the most. In their informality, there was more spontaneity and serendipity that people are trying to avoid these days.
We did a Rite of Jupiter at a pagan gathering in the woods, and it was raining, and we just were going to do this off to the side. We weren't trying to compete or interfere with the gathering that was sponsored sort of along other lines. Just thought it was a fun thing to do out in the woods. We brought a cart to bring in. What did we bring in on that?
Jim.
No. Which character came in the cart?
Well, was it Dionysus at the end?
Dionysus, yeah.
At the very end.
Okay.
You wheeled him in.
Yeah, we wheeled him in a cart. The cart was all decorated, and the cart wheel broke right as they got into the circle. It had been raining. The minute we started the rite, the rain stopped. It was a miracle. But we attracted so many new members to the order just because they kind of came and stood around and watched and thought this was good fun. And
it was real magic in the woods to do a rite of Dionysus like that. With wild maenads and it was beautiful. That rite was meant to be done outdoors. There are just a few that are, and that definitely is one.
That happened a few times where it was kind of a combined effort between LVX Oasis and 93 Lodge, and these campouts were just really popular, and we'd get about 40, 50 people there. So it was pretty nice. And those really started sparking it within me to go even further with it, and that's when, I started just really getting involved, because I have a theater background. I've always done theater and film and special effects and costuming and kind of a little bit of all of that. So it's just natural for me to have hit right into the Rites of Eleusis.
Certainly one of the most memorable was the Rite of Venus that we did at Quinta Essentia Camp, which is no longer around.
I would say between cast, crew, and audience, there was 30 to 40 people maybe at the most, but it filled the backyard.
Oh my gosh, at Kevin and Renee's house.
Jean-Paul went with Papa because the theme was
a Victorian bordello. So
I thought it was good for Jean-Paul to go with his father.
So my son and I, how old was he? He was
in high school or something.
Yeah.
So the men were in tuxedos or smoking jackets, and the women were in long French gowns and furs, and
some people arrived in limos and stuff. And Catelyn Miller played Venus.
There was a buffet of seafood that I had no idea how much it cost, but it was a fortune. That was certainly a very memorable one in terms of just the amount of production that went into it. For an amateur, one done in somebody's backyard.
So it was very impressive, beautifully decorated. The home, Nobleman's home, was beautifully decorated in itself, and it added to the whole situation of seeing for my first time, the first rite.
And she made the most spectacular entrance when Venus appears.
I don't think she played Venus. She kind of was. She was
Venus. Okay.
They actually built a clam shell, like in Botticelli's, the birth of Venus. They actually made one down on the beach, weighed a ton. I can't remember, I think it was chicken wire and plaster Paris or something like that. It was huge. It was like 6 or 7 feet. We did it over a jacuzzi. Venus came naked out of the jacuzzi. They lifted the shell, as in the birth of Venus, and they had dry ice in the jacuzzi, fog machines, lasers.
Jean Paul was really impressed, and then just one by one, in a very artful way, her attendants robe her up and get her out. It was something to tell the kids at school the next day. I tell you, so life is good in the OTO.
I love my religion.
I love my religion.
Yeah, well, once you've done it a few times, then it becomes interesting to become thematic about it and try to, like our Indian Venus, where everybody went and got Indian clothes. And
Thy wings make light in the air as the wings of the dove. Thy feet are as streams that divide the stream of the sea. Earth is thy covering to hide thee, the garment of thee. And twain go forth beside thee, a man with a maid. Her eyes are the eyes of a bride whom the light makes afraid.
it gives you an opportunity to try to put the costumes and the decor and the set and everything together in a way that sensibly fits the theme, and so it gets some more richness and texture to the whole text that you maybe hadn't seen before.
We had, I believe it was 91 or 92, a Rite of Venus at Kevin Renee Gobelman's house in Long Beach. A wonderful Rite of Venus. We had a member at that time who had her fingers in the Wiccan and pagan community and attracted quite a few very lovely women to play specific parts in this Rite of Venus. And she also welcomed several members of her outside circle to join members of the OTO. And as the night proceeded, the hot tub was turned on and clothes were thrown off, and didn't really get crazy, but it was very bacchanal and very memorable. And when the news hit the SoCal pagan community at large, there were lurid tales of women whoring themselves out to the men of the OTO, and all kinds of wild speculation and legend, and it still gets brought up at parties to this day.
And as these 28 years have passed, I realize how much I don't know. My perception has changed. My understanding has changed. Sometimes I look at the rites a little differently than I did when I first got involved. I start picking up certain lines from the characters that I may not have thought about before that have more of a meaning to me.
We do have the flexibility to adapt and to interpret a little bit more broadly. I think it's important to preserve Crowley's original words and intent for the staging as much as possible, but there's still a great deal of latitude within that, and so by having that freedom, it gives us an outlet for creativity. It gives us a way to make each production our own, whether that be individually, our own from the standpoint of our local communities, our local bodies that are putting these on.
The archetype can take you over, that archetypal possession that's talked about sometimes, where, the thought projection of the deity, or the force of that planetary energy just kind of takes you over during the rite, you know, and suddenly it's like you're doing and saying things in a way that you would never have intended during rehearsals or whatever, and all of a sudden it's just there. And I don't know if you've seen some of the videos. Well, you said you have, that rite of Luna in particular, where you can see that happening.
It makes a lot of sense with Crowley's term of the assumption of a God form, where you lose your identity with this an evocation, where you call up from within yourself the elements that you're going to invoke in ritual, until you fill yourself up with it. You bombard your senses so you can think of nothing else. Every other part of you is gone till you are 100% that role, that deity, that personification.
We did a Jupiter out at a place called Joshua Tree, which is just a beautiful rock desert near here. And we were crazy maenads and just having the best time. And I frequently am agave in the rite. And so I get to have the joy of invoking Dionysus, and I get to say all the important things about the fact that we are heirs and we inherit from Dionysus, that we are not outside that magic. And we were busy at the rite, having a wonderful time, very windy, and up on the rocks up above, we see these little heads pop up. And they're little boys who look to be about 9 to 12 years old. And they are just eating this up. They're quiet. They weren't making a sound. And then we started the circumambulations, you know, with the invocation of Dionysus. And it's Iakos, Iake, you know, praise him. And the women are going wild, and now everybody else is getting up. And in one of the things we do in our Jupiter is we draw the audience in. And we circumambulate. Jupiter is in the center. This is something that we brought about that was not part of the rite. We said, well, if it's a wheel, shouldn't everyone be on the wheel? Shouldn't he be at the center? Just like we added our libations, we were the first to make this a wheel where people circumambulated around the wheel. And so the group would get up and circumambulate. There were the more people that got up. And it's funny because it really is like a tornado. It starts very small, next you know, you've got cows flying around the thing with you, and the whole houses are losing their roof. And these boys were watching this, and once the energy, the pitch and the energy level got to a certain point where these little boys are shouting with us, and you think to yourself, uh-oh, what about their parents? Only to realize that they're not going to tell their parents what they saw because there was nothing wrong in it, first of all, but maybe for them there was a little bit, so they definitely are not going to tell their parents. We were fully clothed. There was nothing that we were doing that would be really a negative impact on our community. But what these boys saw and what they experienced, I'm sure impacted them for the rest of their lives. They will never forget that.
Yeah, Egyptian Venuses, mad scientist Mercuries. I can't even go ahead.
The violet wand is a good tool for a mad science Mercury, right? Because it's violet.
Yeah, that was perfect. The beatnik one at Iona Camp, that was amazing. It was set in a beatnik cafe. The whole rite, you know, took part in, like the characters sitting at the bar, and instead of clapping, everybody snapped. You know, in between the big speeches, that was successful. It was very well done, well interpreted.
And around this time, I was started to hang out a lot with Tony Torchia, who is also a great lover of musical theater. And that's when we started kind of meshing Crowley's Rites of Eleusis with Andrew Lloyd Webber's music.
And what she decided to do was adapt some of the songs and the theme of the musical Jesus Christ Superstar to the Rite of Sol. And it was very skillfully done with the poetry and the invocations that Crowley had written for the rite, integrated in with songs from the musical and music from it, and everybody taking a role kind of in that.
Jesus Christ Super Soul made a huge impact. It was booked. Each night we performed it. It had 4 performances, and we had over 200 people that showed up to all of them. It was like word of mouth, and people just packed the place. And happily it got taped. And at the end we had this long scroll that had the final poem in there, and we would pass it along the audience, and people would really get into it. And it was just a very ecstatic version of the rite, and people talked about it for quite a long time afterward. And there's been a few people who have approached me and said, "Hey, let's do it again," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, we can do it again. It takes a lot to do, but we can do it again."
I'm sure it was based largely on that.
So now we call upon rock and roll and classical and all different types of music. We've been fortunate to have a lot of live music at our rites with very talented people, and but I think, I think the generation will show itself. So we could talk all day long about what I think has changed. I'd rather see what's going to change. That's where I am.
There's no reason that culturally we can't free ourselves from the old fuddy-duddies, like us, like me anyway, and move on to what moves people.
Now, I don't know if people nowadays have the attention span to listen to a long poem and actually get something out of it and to be thrilled by it, because I'm telling you, the poetry in those rites are an initiatory experience in themselves. I mean, when you're through hearing them or saying them or reading them over and over again, things that you change, they impress something upon you. I'm not so sure people these days, I don't know, I suppose they can, but I don't know. That's a little different. I think in those days they appreciated poetry more, but they weren't ready for the impact of the poetry then, and they are ready for it now.
What we do with the Rites of Eleusis, we sort of, when we first see them, we kind of get a little bit of what it is. There's like a little kernel there that as you work with them over and over and over again, there's this amplification of energy, of consciousness and expansion and a growth that sort of goes out in many different directions. And so your understanding is not so simple after a while. You also begin to see the understanding not of each one, but as Karen was alluding to earlier, the relationship between the different ones, as part of the descent of going down. And also I think that when you first see a Rite of Eleusis, when you first witness it, there's things that it activates in your mind, in your psyche, but you can't articulate them. You don't know what they are. They're ineffable, if you will.
I was about to talk about that.
About Aretan, which is one of the secrets in the greater mysteries of Eleusis. But it wasn't that it was a secret like as in an oath, but it's that you couldn't articulate it or put it into words. So you couldn't talk about it because it couldn't be expressed in linear language.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
But I couldn't say it.
Okay. And the rites are like that. It triggers things in your psyche, and they're kind of like percolating down here and growing. And Jung also talked about that the personal unconscious is not just things you've repressed. It's things that haven't acquired sufficient psychic energy to cross the threshold into consciousness. But when you get it, like when Karen said, when you get it, that means that the experience, what it's activated in your mind, has built up enough and amplified and expanded that at some point it crosses the threshold into consciousness and you get it.
Right.
But it's been percolating down there since that first Rite of Eleusis you saw 5 years ago, building slowly enough psychic energy before it kindly makes that crossover into that threshold of consciousness where you have the epiphany.
Aha!
The aha experience.
Aha!
I think that's a very important thing that I've seen with other people and with myself over the years of going through them.